tonight. So, yes. So I am right now a postdoctoral fellow at the Center of Behavioral Medicine. And so I got my PhD in clinical psychology in 2020 from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And then I did also a internship, predoctoral internship and postdoc at Rogers Behavioral Health for 2 years. So I worked there in the day treatment programs, so either 3 or 6 hour programs for teens with significant mental health concerns in regards to depression, anxiety, kind of more externalizing concerns. Yeah, and so often also people who had significant sleep concerns. Let's see what else. I've gotten quite a bit of training in cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, and work right now then at the North Shore Center with a variety of children and adolescents and adults, anywhere from 5 to early college age right now. And let's see, I do have also 4 kiddos, 2 boys, 2 girls, 3, 6, 9, and 13. And so I've definitely also have had in the past and ongoing also experiences regards to sleep on a personal level as well. Why don't we get started? I will try to see if I see people's questions as the talk goes on. Feel free to try to post them, and then if I see them, I will happily respond. Otherwise, I will make sure to also that we have some time at the end to take for questions.
Right, that sounds great. And I'm not sure, I believe I disabled, just from my public meeting settings, I believe I disabled the chat. So if you did though have a question in kind of the moment, feel free to start your video so we can kind of see you, your video start, and we'll know that you have a question then in the moment. Okay, we also do have reactions enabled. So if you wanted on the bottom of kind of the taskbar of the Zoom window, if you wanted to do reactions and do some sort of, raise hand, things like that, either of those would work. But we will save some time for questions at the end. That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vice President Paul Henningsen. All right, so why doesn't my... There we go. All right, so here's a quick overview. I wanted to start with an understanding of sleep, the function of sleep, consequences and signs of sleep problems, long-term and medium-term kind of risk factors for sleep problems, then move into strategies regarding addressing those risk factors, as well as an effective bedtime routine and what are some important things to think about in regards to that, and then also how to support your teens' healthy sleep. So from a psychological perspective, there's a couple of things important in regards to sleep. First, physical health is critical for cognitive and emotional health, and sleep, of course, is an important factor for that as well. And you can think about also, even from the concept of the fight-flight response that we and also our teens often experience during the day. That's not really a time that when the body can engage in any kind of repair processes. That's a lot of what happens when we're relaxed, and that includes also when we're sleeping. And so, for example, disruptions in the sleep process can then also have issues for physical health, which then also can in turn then also affect cognitive and emotional health as well. And then also there's a really important role for sleep in regards to memory consolidation and also, for example, problem-solving insights. You may have potentially experienced it as well. That you had maybe a vexing problem and you slept over it and then actually had a good insight about maybe a new approach or just a good solution for that. And the memory consolidation, what that really means is basically when we're learning things, they have to be kind of solidified on a physiological basis in our brain. And that happens over time, including also when we're sleeping. And so when we're not sleeping well or not enough, then that can also, for example, actually impact the learning process in that way. So here are a couple of signs of sleep problems. So difficulties falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night and then having difficulties, falling back to sleep, then waking up too early, like at 4 or 5 in the morning when you actually need to only go to bed, get up at 6:30 or 7, and not feeling rested after sleep, and also falling asleep at school, for example. So some of the physical consequences of sleep problems include a weakened immune system. We already talked a little bit about that earlier in regards to the fight-flight response being on more if we don't have enough sleep. And so then that can eventually also affect the body's defense mechanisms. It can also, the sleep problems can be related to unhealthy eating, and is also associated with a weight gain and obesity. And I think there's some physiological relationships with that, as well as, for example, that if we're up late at night, sometimes our food choices are, for example, not the best and that kind of stuff. And so that can be also kind of an emotional aspect to the food choices that then can lead to some physical consequences. There's also, with extensive and kind of chronic stress, the stress regulation system in the brain kind of burns out, and it can literally be physically toxic to certain areas, including the hippocampus, which is a critical area for memory. So some of the cognitive consequences of not enough sleep are, it impacts also attention. So for example, how consistently and sustained your attention is, how accurately you're noticing details, it can also narrow your attention, and you're actually missing maybe important things in your environment or in your experiences. You might focus, for example, much more on negative experiences or stimuli versus in general what's going on. It also affects memory, and so that includes the encoding, which is the initial, also paying attention and translating what you're perceiving from the outside world in the brain to the initial information. The working, I should say working memory. The working memory is manipulating information. Like, for example, if you're solving a math problem, you're reading it, and then you have to think about it and figure out what the solution is. And the retrieving is maybe, it's a question about a math fact, and then you have to actually remember that. And so all of that can be also impacted by fatigue. And if you're thinking about, especially in the high school age, that academic tasks get more and more complex, the critical thinking takes a larger aspect also of the challenges, then you want to have your full cognitive capacities in place to effectively solve and approach those academic challenges. There's also significant emotional regulation consequences to sleep problems, including an increased sensitivity to stressful situations, meaning that there's sort of a lower threshold when something really bothers you or produce an intense response, or then also your emotional response can take a longer time to return back to baseline. And so there tends to be also more negative affect, more cognitive distortions, so more kind of thinking traps people fall into. And then also, of course, with maybe more chronic sleep problems, or if there's in general less healthy body physiology, maybe you're not working out, also that kind of stuff, that you're just less emotionally resilient to manage and respond to stressors. And then also adaptive strategies generally tend to involve a significant amount of effort. And if we're really tired, then that's just, there's much lower motivation to engage in that significant effort. And so then often if basically things kind of accumulate, that can definitely also increase feelings of depression. You can feel more overwhelmed and more anxious and irritable also in general. Signs of healthy sleep. That it takes maybe about less than 30 minutes to fall asleep, and then also back to sleep when you wake up, that you don't necessarily frequently wake up at night, that you feel rested after sleep, and also that you don't necessarily take more than a really short nap or no nap during the day. Now, of course, this is for older children and adults, not necessarily for our little toddlers. And this is just a little table for some context. If you're having for example, a 12, 13-year-old that, roughly if they need to get up at 6:30 in the morning, according to the Sleep Foundation guidelines, that, yeah, they should kind of fall asleep around that window, And so if they are going to bed at 9 o'clock and it takes them about an hour to fall asleep, well, then they're already missing out a good bit of their sleep time. And some kids might need more really that 11-hour, whereas other kids might need the 9 hours. And I think that just depends on your child and the circumstances. And so I would maybe not get too fixated on specific amounts, but that's more of a general idea. So risk factors for sleep problems. ADHD and attention impulsivity can definitely make it harder in the evenings to settle down, or to, for example, stick with a bedtime routine, or to maybe you want to cooperate with a bedtime routine, that kind of stuff. Certainly traumatic experiences and PTSD, one of those symptoms can be nightmares and recurring nightmares. And those can be really stressful. That can take a long time to fall back to sleep to. Anxiety, when you're worrying about things, for example, your grades and that kind of stuff, or social issues, that can definitely make it harder to fall asleep. And then depression can also be related with a variety of sleep problems, including falling asleep, staying asleep, sleeping too long, sleeping too little. And then, yeah, if there's a crammed schedule, that can also make it challenges for effective sleeping. I, a few weeks ago, was studying for my licensing exams, and then was, studying sometimes until 9:30 or 10 in the last couple of nights, and then sometimes would basically go a little later to bed than I am really my goal is. And so then that made it then sometimes a little harder next day to focus and that kind of stuff. And so I try to turn that ship around. But so it's important also to think about your teen schedule. And I'm coming from Germany, and definitely compared to the US, the Americans definitely can have very busy schedules, and yeah, that can just make it challenging to have also some enough time to wind down. All right, so what are some ways to address some of these risk factors for sleep problems? First of all, just in general, working on addressing mental health problems that can involve, if there's some significant mental health problems, getting also some therapy for your child, or can involve also just a variety of other strategies, including meditation. We'll talk about the DBT skill in just a moment, the bedtime routine, just effective organizing and prioritizing and scheduling, so that maybe your child's not worrying about a bunch of things they need to do when they haven't planned out yet when they're trying to fall asleep. Meditation can be very helpful in regards to helping practice your child more, having more control over their focus and what they focus on and what they pay attention to, if they pay attention to worries or if they pay attention to other things. And so that can be also definitely an important general factor, although it can be a fair bit of work and sometimes initially kind of unpleasant. And so it can be maybe a bit of a hard sell initially for teens. And then, flexible, appropriate expectations in parents in regards to your child's performance, especially maybe if they're having a harder time in general and are maybe also struggling with some significant anxiety or depression, to maybe then reduce the expectations for a bit while they're addressing their problems, and then eventually kind of increasing those expectations. So the DBT please skill, as one of the dialectical behavior therapy skills. So the idea is to treat physical illness. So for example, if you have a sports injury or something like that, important to take care of that so that you're, for example, not experiencing major pain, which might also then make it more challenging to fall asleep, that you're eating balanced meals, you're not eating too little, but you're also not eating too much, eating a nice healthy variety, that you're staying away from mood altering substances, including some of our illicit substances, as well as of course for adults, and also alcohol, for example, can make it more challenging to fall asleep. And balancing the sleep, talked already kind of about minimizing naps, and we'll talk some more about a good bedtime routine in just a moment. And then a balanced exercise. I think especially if it's kind of more moderate to mild, can be also helpful in the evenings. It all just depends on the person, especially more intense exercise tends to more make people more alert, and so that can make it more challenging to fall asleep. But for some people, even that can help. So I think it all depends. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. The DBT please skill, is that all 5 of those components?
Yes.
Okay, is the please like an acronym, or like, does it stand for
Yes,
something?
so the P and L is for treat physical illness. It's a little clunky.
Okay.
And then the E is for the balanced eating, A is for avoid mood altering stuff, and so forth.
Okay,
good
thank
question.
you. And I just want to double check, is there anybody that had a question up until this moment? Anybody that had a question? Okay, sounds great. I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And actually, yeah, if you wouldn't mind maybe alerting me also if somebody has a question, because I minimized the little screen so I can see the whole screen. Okay.
Yes, I'll keep an eye.
Thank you. All right, so now let's talk about the bedtime routine. Let's start with some principles. So basically, the key component of, let's also watch the time. Okay. The key component of the concept of the bedtime routine is also that our body needs multiple cues that it is time to relax and go to bed. And so it tends to not necessarily be enough to just brush your teeth and turn off the light, and then all of a sudden you're magically relaxed and everything is great. But that there's sort of multiple steps that gives you multiple cues, like, oh, and if I do those repeatedly, then you associate, and this is the classical conditioning aspect with the Pavlov's dog, that when we keep doing the same steps every night, then the body can then eventually associate it. Oh, when I brush my teeth, when I then actually do some reading, and when I then maybe do a little bit of meditation, okay, this is telling me it's now bedtime, and then I'm associating that with relaxing. And so then just by already keep doing those same steps, that can already help them with the relaxation aspect. And that is definitely, I think, also an important area to collaborate with your child in regards to certain things, might not be up for debate in regards to, for example, when they need to go to bed. But for example, what are some steps, that would be helpful to them to help them kind of settle down, that, could be a good place to collaborate. So the idea is we can't really control and just decide we're going to fall asleep. What the idea is basically is that we're engaging in behaviors that increase the chance that we fall asleep. It's important to accept that on any given night, you may actually not fall asleep, or it may take you 3 or 4 hours to fall asleep, and that's okay. Because basically, the more we worry about falling asleep, the more it's not going to happen. And so it can be kind of a vicious cycle. And so the key is just to focus on when we're doing things that increase the chances that we will eventually fall asleep. And then it will eventually happen. It might be, across a couple nights. Effective bedtime cues. It's important to have a consistent schedule. So that's sort of also that the time of the day is also already a cue of like, okay, it's time now to relax. For example, you might be sort of like 9 o'clock. That's when I start maybe slowing things down before I go to bed at like 10:15 or something like that. Having multiple cues, we talked about that. Also that basically try to minimize naps that can anyways make it harder to also fall asleep when they're more than 20 minutes. And also it helps just associate with like sleeping is actually at night so that it's just very clear. Also bed. This is a big one for, I think I would say, parents and families. Make sure that your child has a comfortable chair, not just some kind of wooden chair that's maybe not that comfortable for them, but some kind of comfortable chair in their room where they can hang out so that they're not doing homework and a bunch of other stuff in bed, but just sleeping so that their body also knows, oh, if I go to bed, that means I'm sleeping. And then it's important that things are really as dark as possible, as quiet as possible. White noise machines can be really helpful. We'll talk about screens in just a minute. Okay. Some things about the body physiology, try to basically not eat that dinner too late, maybe outside of that 2-hour window, excuse me. And avoid caffeine, nicotine, at least a good 8 hours or so before bed. Although I would say also with this, it's just basically try things out. Some people can drink caffeine late at night and then still sleep really well, and others really cannot at all. So just monitor. That's something to monitor. We talked already about exercise. Some keep the room temperature cool, and then rather have your child or yourself put on some layers in regards to clothes or blankets to stay warm. Media. So our DBT folks here make pretty strong statements about no laptops, iPads, phones, screens, at least an hour before bedtime. I think that's definitely a good goal. Maybe if it's initially a battle, you can start with half an hour and then move it out to an hour. You can definitely also restrict, and there's a couple of different reasons why this is, because screens, of course, with the light can also make you more alert or give you cues there's actually still daylight, as well as for example, also on social media and whatnot, there can be unpredictable occurrences of things that could really upset you, make it actually harder to fall asleep and that kind of stuff. And then of course also video and video games and just media and in general can be really hard to disengage. There is, especially with videos and video games, about a good 15 to 20 minutes when the executive functioning in your brain is depleted and needs to recover first. And so when you're, for example, turning off screens, that's why often kids are not the greatest at controlling their behaviors, because their self-control system in the brain still actually is recovering. And so I think that's just something important to keep in mind when you're dealing with turning off screens and that kind of stuff. I think there's definitely ways of setting limits in regards to the screens where you can disable certain apps and that kind of stuff to, for example, maybe only let the music app or meditation app still work and everything else is kind of blocked out after a certain time. But of course, also at this point, you have other devices like a little Alexa device or something that doesn't even have a screen that you could use for example, for some meditation or music or that kind of stuff to help you settle into sleep. Okay. One more time, yeah. So here are some ideas in regards to creating some bedtime routines. So some of those categories can be also organization related. You can check update to-do lists, that kind of stuff. Notice if there's any thoughts floating around in your head, especially about things that need to be done and everything. Take note of that. You can tidy up the room, make it look, for example, nice so that when you're getting up in the morning, the first thing you don't see necessarily is like a giant mess. Now, of course, for teens, for example, maybe their tidy room might not actually be that meaningful. So keep that also in mind. And It could be also sort of related to closure and reflection. Maybe you do some, you can do some journaling, checking in with friends, parents, people kind of processing the day, anything difficult that happened, or just kind of do an emotional check-in with yourself, especially if they're an older teen, and then kind of make a plan of like, oh, I'm noticing I'm like really worried. Okay, what are some skills I can use to kind of help relax and manage that some more, so that I have a smooth transition into bedtime. A couple of relaxation ideas. Taking a bath, showers can be helpful in the evening. And now sometimes parents complain, "Oh, my teen took an hour shower," but I mean, sometimes it can be very relaxing, and maybe after a horrible day, that's maybe not the worst thing they might do. Gentle exercise, reading, listening to music, watching some relaxing TV maybe earlier in the bedtime routine before that hour. So maybe if you're having a bedtime routine that lasts about an hour and a half or 2 hours, then that could be included sort of early on, and then maybe you turn it eventually off closer to maybe the hour or so before actual lights out. Call friends, play a game, do word search, Sudoku, that kind of stuff, kind of paper and pencil kind of things. All right, so navigating the crisis before lights are out. So if you get upset at night, or if your teen gets, patiently work on relaxing. Here are a couple of strategies we'll talk about in just a moment. Some more is distracting and various distracting strategies. Improving is also various kind of coping skills, strategies to help with intense emotions. Self-soothing is great, and this can be also a great general routine, just doing things that feel nice to the five senses, like putting on some nice smelling lotion, or taking that shower that's nice and warm or hot, or listening to some music you enjoy, or listening to watching some funny clips and that kind of stuff. The accept skill, this is a DBT skill, so that involves distracting with activities, with that could be, I would suggest in the evening, so kind of calm activities, but just kind of keep yourself busy versus kind of ruminating about the day or doing a bunch of worrying. Contributing could be doing something kind to somebody else, maybe you notice the dishwasher isn't all the way loaded, you could load that, or write a nice little letter to somebody, or just give somebody a compliment. You can compare your own situation to your own situation in the past. Maybe we have gotten through more difficult things, or you can compare it to other people who are less fortunate than you. You can do things that create different emotions in you, like watch a fun, for example, funny, or read something funny when you're sad or something like that. You can kind of create an imaginary wall to your worries and just focus intensely on something else. That's kind of also related to replacing your thoughts. Basically, our minds basically continuously tell some kind of narrative, and then if you're not actively engaging with something, your mind is just kind of take over. And so here you can make some choices. For example, those are the things like with the word searches or Sudoku, where you really have to focus on what you're doing, or it could be also a video game, but later at night that can be a concern. Or intensify other sensations. That could be like feeling some of the cold water when you're running the water in the sink, or even going outside and feeling some of that cold right now. Improving super quickly, because I know time is going by fairly quickly. Imagery is imagining things. So this could be, for example, imagining maybe a pleasant event that's coming up in the next couple of days or weeks, or imagining in general your happy place. So that's for me, for example, the beach, and then just really trying with all the five senses to imagine what a lovely day at the beach is like. Meaning is making meaning of the moment. Okay, what's the opportunity right now for me to, for example, when I'm stressed out still, then be able to use some coping skills. And so I'm like, for example, becoming more resilient by getting through that stressful situation effectively. Prayer, for a lot of people, prayer can be really helpful to get through difficult situations, especially if they're, and this is in general also for the skill, this is helpful when there's kind of ongoing challenging, could be even ongoing challenging sleep problems. So yeah, prayer for those who use prayers, that can be quite helpful. Relaxation here means any kind of relaxing activity. One thing in the moment means really focusing on that one thing, even when you're feeling maybe overwhelmed with school and you're like, oh God, I got to do these 3 or 4 things, and you're trying to multitask. That often then makes problems kind of worse, and just maybe make a simple to-do list, and then you're tackling the biggest issue or the most important one, most pressing one, and you going down one down the list. Vacation. This is vacation can last anywhere from in DBT a second to a couple of weeks of the European style vacation. But that can just be just taking a little break. And doing something pleasant. That might be, this I think applies more doing situations in the day. For example, if you're in school, you're real stressed out, and you may just kind of close your eyes for a minute and just kind of take a couple deep breaths, and then you're kind of looking up again and focusing on what's going on. And then encouragement, you can especially also ahead of time write yourself some encouraging phrases, for example, in regards to sleep, and that I will eventually fall asleep and that kind of stuff. I have fallen asleep in the past when I was really stressed out and that kind of thing. Maybe have just in your phone or in a little a note by a night desk. And so that can also kind of help get through that difficult moment. Lights out. So in the short term, I think distractions are fine if there are some sort of significant sleep problems. And so it can be ineffective to distract with, for example, listening to some kind of bedtime stories. At this point, for example, Headspace, and now I think also Calm, the other app, and they're all over the place at this point. They have really great stories also for adults that are really nice, because they help the brain be a little bit busy focusing on something, but they tend to be basically boring enough that you eventually relax and fall asleep. You can also listen to a boring podcast. There's literally a boring books podcast that is available completely for free, where this lovely lady is just reading books from 100, 200 years ago that, for example, go into all the details about how to maintain agricultural machinery. And that is very boring for most people. And so that can be quite helpful if you're, for example, really worried and just it's hard to turn up those worries. What can also be helpful is to listen, for example, to the same thing over and over, and then you can associate already with listening to a certain part of the story with already also falling asleep. It's important then to use sleep timers there, so that your story, for example, the Audible book, doesn't run for all those 8 hours, but maybe for half an hour or so, and then you just kind of reset it if you're still out of sleep. Without distraction, basically the idea is you can either have sort of an open mind and just you're not particularly focusing on anything, and you just kind of let your mind wander, and that way you fall asleep. Or you can have sort of a focused mind and count your breath, count backwards from 1,000. Imagine, your happy place and that kind of stuff, but basically focus your attention on something in your mind. If you can't fall asleep, so after 30 minutes, so often I hear children, for example, telling me, oh yeah, like I tried for 2 hours to fall asleep and I just could not, and I can't, or sometimes it took me 4 hours. Well, then if you're spending that much time trying to fall asleep, then you're associating your brain also then when you're laying in bed with stress and with tossing and turning. And so the idea here is that after 30 minutes, when you've tried to fall asleep and you're just not falling asleep, then you want to do something that is calming to you, but outside of bed. So, maybe you're reading something that's relaxing or boring, or doing, a word search or crossword puzzle or something like that, listening to some relaxing music. And then when you're feeling more sleepy again, okay, then you're going back to bed and you're trying again. Important, no video games, social media, and that kind of stuff. That can definitely then wake you up again, or then all of a sudden you're watching 2 hours of Netflix, and then you could have probably fallen back to sleep after half an hour. And then, yes, talked already about that. So, when you're having also a teen who likes to stay up way too long, then, figure out what is also the function of the behavior. I mean, I was talking the other day to somebody who, for example, was like, yeah, my friends are all up really late. So then if I go to bed early, then I'm missing actually out on important socializing time, so we worked on kind of problem solving that. Or is it that they're avoiding maybe feeling really worried, and so then they're staying up until they are just exhausted to the extent they can't even think anymore, and then just plop into bed and right away fall asleep. That can actually be a form of avoidance, and of course it can be also just hard to stop watching that Netflix. And we'll talk some more about well, actually, I have it right here. So, of course, you can remove physical access of devices. There's all kinds of also digital products these days with parent controls to set up some stimulus control, because it's basically, especially with the younger teens, can be kind of unreasonable to expect them to have enough self-control to turn that Netflix off, for example, by themselves without any cue, without any reminder. Yeah, so then for older teens or also adults, you can there's also apps, for example, like I use that these days too, Alarm Clock Extreme. I have to, for example, solve 7 really difficult, well, fairly difficult math problems before the alarm will turn off, and the alarm gets loud and annoying, and it's basically just enough time between, for example, watching some Netflix, and for me it's time to turn that off in the evening, that initially I just want to keep watching Netflix, but after I've solved that 7th math problem, I'm like, okay, that's right, I actually do no, I need to get to bed in a little bit, and so I don't want to keep watching Netflix, because then I will be too tired in the morning, and then I'm going to have a more difficult day. And so it can buy you some time to kind of reduce that urge to just kind of keep, for example, engaging with that media. So glad we're making good pace here. So how can you support your team? So one concept is the social learning concept, that the teens observe what you're doing also, and if for example, you can then lead by modeling having healthy expectations on yourself. That includes then also having a healthy work-life balance and work-life boundaries. To not try not to work until 2 o'clock in the morning and whatnot, and to also model that to your children, including also having that bedtime routine and that self-care. I personally think it is really important when we're asking teens to do things, that we don't really ask them to do things that we wouldn't do ourselves, that we need to be ready to do that too. So another way to support your teen can be through structuring an environment. So that's, for example, stimulus control, and setting up those controls, for example, for the media, that, you can set things up so that phone or that iPad just becomes basically a brick, not usable to the child, or that only certain apps work. So that you can avoid some of the power struggles and battles and that kind of stuff. Now, of course, if your teen can manage to use their phone, keep it in their room, and also then go to bed at a reasonable amount of time and that kind of stuff, and have good sleep, then of course there's not a problem there that you need to solve. But if your child does have sleep problems, or has problems, giving up media or stopping watching, then you can use some of those strategies to do that. Now, of course, teens are smart, and so, for example, my oldest 13-year-old, I mean, he regularly, depending on what the software is, can manage ways to get around the software or somehow eventually uninstall it. So it can be sometimes a bit tedious. And sometimes the good old-fashioned just physically collecting things can be effective. This could be a whole talk that in itself. You can definitely also increase motivation through setting up some kind of behavior plan, basically some kind of consequences for effectively giving up media, for effectively engaging in a bedtime routine, for effectively turning out lights at a certain time, and that kind of thing, and cooperating throughout the process depending on how old your child is, And then, for example, I mean, these days, kids tend to love their devices and their media. And so that can be a good reinforcer that you can use, so that, for example, depending on how your child did with the evening routine and the next day, then they can have a certain amount of media depending on how they did, last night with handling their bedtime routine, for example. That can be some way to earn points and minutes, for example. If you need some more motivation because your child is kind of maybe just saying, no, I don't want to bloody bother with a bedtime routine, or I don't want to go to bed right now. And then whoops. Also, if their significant sleep problems persist, maybe because, for example, they're related to anxiety and maybe you're already working with a therapist, then it can definitely be good to also consider a medical consultation for potentially some sleep medications. They can be quite helpful, especially if there's significant or maybe severe sleep problems. And they often can be something that you can use maybe for a couple of weeks or a couple of months to help kind of get back on track. And then eventually it can be phased out. Of course, they can also have all kinds of side effects or make your child maybe more sleepy during the day, and so forth. And so, yeah, those can be some problems that you might need to problem solve in addition to that. But they can definitely play an important role, especially kind of on a temporary basis, to kind of help right the ship in regards to sleep. I think that is it. Here's a couple of citations. Yeah, I tried to sort of go fairly quickly through it. I usually have the tendency of kind of going over, so it's good that we have a couple minutes, I think, for some questions. Hope I didn't race through it too intensely.
All right, thank you. So I of course have some questions because I always do. I also realized I forgot to introduce myself. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie Henningsen. I'm the associate principal here at the high school. So I'm sorry for that, but I am happy to save my questions if anybody else had some questions before me. All right, practicing wait time here. Okay, so I will jump in, but again, feel free to, show your video or unmute if you have a question. So I had a question, Nathanael, about, and this was always an issue in high school when I would stay over at a friend's house. Does lighting matter? Like sometimes people sleep with the light of a TV on, or a bright hallway light on, or now there's LED lights on beds or whatever. Does lighting matter?
For sure, yes. And I think I had meant to have it somewhere on the slide. Maybe or maybe I don't know if that slide somehow got lost. But yes, lighting is very important. Basically, as dark as possible. I mean, like when I am sleep training also my little kids, I mean, I would seal the windows so that it was just pitch dark. Now, of course, that can make an anxious kid more anxious, right? It's more dark. And so you might work with an anxious kid gradually to make it darker, So initially we have the full blast lights on, okay, and then let's dim them. And eventually you have a couple LED lights, and then eventually let's take those out. Let's put those on a timer, and eventually they're completely gone. But yes, the optimal sleep situation is basically making it as dark as possible.
I finally got my 5-year-old down from basically the light on in the room to a dream catcher with some twinkle lights on it. So I got there.
So what can be helpful, for example, there is also I used for a while with my kiddos a little bit, one of those little sleep turtles that then has a little timer, where the light stays on for 20 minutes, might help them fall asleep. And then, of course, ultimately, it's good for them to just be comfortable with the entire darkness. But especially as a temporary situation, that can be for sure a good thing to have basically a timer on the lighting. And then it will just turn off eventually when they're anyways already asleep. That way, it's not going to disrupt the entire night in some ways.
Right. So another question I had was from, obviously here at the high school, and I talked to a lot of students, and like I will say almost like oftentimes, like more often than not, students like won't, and students even that I have like a very good relationship with, they like can't put their finger right on why they can't like fall asleep. Okay. And so then what I'm finding is when they like can't put their finger on why they can't sleep, they feel like there's nothing that can solve it or
Mm,
that nothing can be
mhm,
the solution.
mhm,
So I like
mhm,
these idea. I mean, you gave us a few different acronyms of kind of some things to like
mhm,
try, but I
mhm,
just think the idea of like, like anything else worth getting, right? You have to work at it,
mhm,
right? Like
mhm,
there are strategies, there are actions you have to take.
mhm.
Um, so that was kind of like my aha moment that
Yeah, and I think
even if you
there's
don't know why, there's
right,
things that
and I
you
think you can both use some strategies without knowing exactly why you're feeling things.
Mhm.
Well, number one, a lot of these kind of distraction or relaxation strategies, they'll help work with any kind of emotion. If it's anxiety, if it's sadness or being really angry or whatever it is, it can help just reduce that intensity of the emotion. But then also, of course, and that can be something more worked on and maybe also in therapy, really, is what I do a lot is behavior chain analyses. We're looking at the chains of events and we're really trying to dissect what sometimes moment by moment, what are your thoughts? What's in a sensation? What are you doing then? And then how are all these things connected? Um, and so the more you train your awareness of that, you can be like, oh yeah, I'm having a lot of catastrophic thoughts about what's going to happen tomorrow. Or I am ruminating a lot about having a lot of regret about how I handled something earlier in the day, with my family or with a teacher. I keep thinking back about that. And it takes some practice, as you were talking about, in regards to anything, including also that awareness of what are you actually thinking, um, and what are you experiencing. And sometimes it can also be really scary to actually open that Pandora's box, and people don't want to open that Pandora's box. And so then can even sometimes some time to actually just work up on the courage to like start looking at all those thoughts that are coming out at night.
right. One other thing that came when you were talking about like setting boundaries for for your student, especially around like social media. And this has actually also come up a few times in my 10 years here where um students often will say things like, well, I was on a group chat and if I left, then X, Y, or Z. Like I would miss something they talked about, or I would, but I think, um, like, and what has come up then in those meetings is like, well, what if they knew it was because, like sometimes parents need to be like their excuse for them rather than,
Mm-hmm,
oh, you were just like the
mm-hmm,
lame friend that, like went to bed
mm-hmm,
before
mm-hmm,
everybody else. And I think sometimes
mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm.
being the parent who sets that limit,
Yeah.
it's easier for a kid to be like, "Ugh, my mom is making
Mm-hmm.
me get off the phone,
Oh
get off
yeah.
the phone, then I'm choosing to get off the phone."
Right. No, I
Right.
think that's a great opportunity to, I mean, that is the responsibility of parents to set boundaries. And I think that can definitely be an appropriate place to basically put some blame on parents.
Well, and
So yeah,
sometimes kids,
this
they're
is,
so grateful for it, like, oh,
mhm,
thanks, mom.
mhm,
Like,
mhm.
thanks, you
Yeah, you
invited,
need to have
my
sort of a
out.
safe way out. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
Well, I think, a lot of recurring like themes that I kept hearing over and over in a lot of the strategies was that it really does rely on like strong self-talk, right? Whether it's
Mhm,
trying to like
mhm,
free or open up your mind or hyper focus on something that can help you respond to sleep, or how you're
mhm,
reframing or rewriting a narrative of something that happened earlier that day or that's going to happen tomorrow. And it just, it makes me grateful that we're able to kind of provide not only like to our parents, these random parent nights throughout the year, but just like with, your colleague Jenny Strom has been coming to speak to our students during their PE classes about various things like that. And because
mhm.
self-talk and rewriting narratives isn't really something you can just like pick up and do, right? Like it takes
Mhm,
practice
mhm,
like
mhm. Yeah.
anything. So just grateful to have that partnership with you guys. And I thank you so much
Mhm.
for being here tonight. And
Yeah,
I
it's a
know
pleasure.
plenty of our parents. And so actually we do release the recording through our principal letters home. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. You have a good night.
You all have a good night too.
Thanks.
Good night.